Hello and welcome along to Netball Unlocked, a brand new podcast from me, Paul Prenderville, and Chloe Merrell. How are you, Chloe?
Yeah, I'm very good, thank you, Paul. Very excited to get on this journey with you on this podcast road.
Why now and why this? I think that's the first question we probably asked each other, didn't we? I feel like before we get too deep into netball and what's happening, I feel like for us, it's maybe been a long time coming, right?
I think that's, I mean, you and I first met 2019, and it was me bothering you about netball coverage.
You were actually bothering the Twitter universe as it was then. You were moaning about why you couldn't see any netball to write a report on, like in really simple terms. And I think I said to you, write me a report, like watch it and write me a report. And then obviously we've both kind of gone on various journeys since then. But I think whilst netball has always been part of what I did during sort of various career moves, it isn't anymore. And I've still stayed very connected to the game. I go and watch a lot. I volunteer a lot. And to that end, I've kind of been thinking, when's the right time to get involved? And then you obviously kind of were thinking the same thing. And not so long ago, reached out to me and thought, is there something in this? And we've kind of probably exchanged more messages than our loved ones would probably be comfortable with. But we've obviously chatted a lot, and here we are. So, yeah, that's kind of a little bit of background from me. Like, what about you?
I think, that person in me that bothered the Twitter universe in 2019 hasn't stopped bothering. I think my career has gone in a slightly different direction from netball. I work for the Olympics, Olympics.com, as a news producer there. I've covered now several Olympic games, but always my heart belongs in netball, and it's always been about how can I best serve netball and help illuminate this beautiful game that we have, and tell these stories and actually start, now that netball is going professional, start holding netball a little bit to account as it goes on that journey, like we would any other sport. You and I both cover a lot of sports as well between us. So it's sort of wanting to put netball through that ringer a little bit as well, and hold a mirror up to it and help it sort of professionalize in the best way. So yeah, I've been covering bits and bobs for netball, writing for The Guardian as and when I've been able to, because it's been a busy life. But 6 years later, here we are. And I think the reason is because of that professionalization journey and what we can do for it, really.
Yeah, it sounds ridiculous, but I think sometimes sport needs its independent voices, and for various reasons, and we'll probably get into this in this episode and many, many more. It feels like that netball needs that kind of support and question and all that sort of stuff that goes with like standard sporting coverage. I remember many times sort of during my time at Sky, often talking to the players and the coaches involved who kind of liked being held to account. I think sometimes the sport can maybe feel like it isn't quite ready to be critical of itself. And I think the opposite. I think a sport needs to be critical of itself, whether that's on court or on field or on pitch or off it as well. And I feel like, not that we're here to criticise, I think it's a super exciting time for netball. I have a young daughter who can now look at netball and think there's potentially a career here for me. I think we both know enough netballers who think the same. There are challenges for some who have to balance careers now and ultimately will have to end up making decisions. So there's so much going on. There's new franchises. There's franchises that have fallen by the wayside. There's arenas to talk about. There's new rules to talk about as well. So there's so much to get involved in. But I think before we kind of really go deep into the weeds, and a little peek behind the curtain here as far as Netball Unlocked episode 1 is concerned, this is going to be about us, why we're deciding to do this, and what netball can expect this season. And we'll kind of take a little bit of a look ahead to 2.0 and also the Super Cup this weekend, which is again something brand new. Might have one or two guests along the way if people play ball with us early doors as we establish our name. But yeah, look, I think just as Chloe mentioned there, she's kind of been on her journey. I've been on mine. I now work for Talk Sport, and I'm the US sport editor there, which is super exciting. But again, I can't get away from netball. I have a child who played 5 games of it over the weekend. So
better than most
crazy.
of us.
Yeah, more than both of us. But look at like we said. Look, I suppose, Chloe, I think I wrote a little bit of a mission statement for us on a 6 a.m. tube journey the other day. But what do you see this year being for netball? That's a really open question. But I do think it's important that we kind of think about what netball is about to embark on.
I think it's going to be growing pains. I think there's all this ambition, there's this excitement, there are these targets, but we're carrying on from where we left off last season, and that sort of left us in quite an interesting place. There are several things that hit the top of the agenda, like blowout games. Is our league competitive enough? Where is the NSL in relation to the Super Netball League? How's our league feeding the international teams? All of those questions are going to still be there. But now we're throwing in less teams, less players, a super shot. So it's and what that looks like is going to be really interesting. I don't know if it's going to be smooth. I'd love for it to be, but I don't think it's going to be. So it's going to be, I think, for us, Paul, really asking ourselves what's been, what's going to happen, and where the sport is adjusting and how it's adjusting. And I think that's going to be actually one of our strengths, is that you and I have a lot of experience covering other sports that have been on those kind of journeys. So you were at the Super Bowl in New Orleans very recently.
Yeah, you were at the All-Star game though, right? So
I was at the NBA All-Star game in San Francisco. So we've seen the very pinnacle of sport. I've been at an Olympic Games as well, but a lot of those sports are very amateur. So I've spent a lot of time covering skateboarding, which has made its way into the games, but there's also been a lot of learning and seeing how that's evolved. So I think you and I have a patience, but we also have an expectation too. And I think fans do of netball as well. 2018, we were talking about a turning point. We haven't really seen it. 2022, I think, was, hard to call it a missed opportunity, because ultimately sport is sport, but there was a slip, and we had a COVID pandemic. So there's a lot of things going on. The women's sportscape has got busier as well. So I would love for netball to walk away from this season with more attention, for there to have been some breakthroughs, but I also would love for the little teething problems that you and I are going to come on and identify to at least be ironed out, or to have to be more transparency, to be more communication. It's a lot, it's a wish list, but I think that's sort of where I'm at on it. What about you? Where do you see it?
No, I think that's really fair. I've worked in sort of digital and evolving sports media for nearly far too long than I actually want to say. If I said when I started, my job involved me kind of doing football commentaries on premium rate phone lines for fans, that'll tell you how far back my career goes. But what I think is that in digital media, at least, and social media, and how all of that has evolved, that there's always a lesson to be learned. And I feel like lessons are fine. I feel like bumps in the road and kind of forks and decisions to be made, and all those kind of really kind of cliche things that we say about life in general, not just sport, I think they apply to netball in this instance. And it's like, it doesn't have to be easy, but it does have to be, I suppose, realistic and accept, okay, we've got challenges. And I think we would all sit here and admit getting bums on seats is probably the biggest challenge that the sport's faced for a really long time. How do we get people to come and watch it? How do we get people to watch it on TV as well, which is super positive way for so many more people to consume it? And I think one thing we learned when I was at Sky is that actually it's a very untraditional sporting audience. It's a female audience, it's a younger audience. That brings challenges in terms of getting people to arenas or kind of watching things on TV. I think sometimes fans can sit and get a little bit frustrated as to why stuff isn't being shown a little bit more, but there are challenges, and kind of I will play devil's advocate a little bit sometimes, because I've been fortunate enough to work on the inside, and I know that there are challenges in sort of production costs and all the things that go like that. It's not as easy as just let's put 5 games on TV this weekend, because you need a You need to get cameras. You need to make it look polished. There's no point in putting 5 cameras for one game on a Friday night, but only having 1 camera at a game on a Saturday. Now, the netball fan in you, Chloe, will probably say, yeah, but I'll then be able to watch all 5 games. But it's about a product. And I feel like netball stands in a really good position at a really good time in the sporting landscape. Like, women's sport has never been as popular as it is. So how does it maximise its place in the sporting landscape? And I feel like the 10-year plan is great, and that's wonderful and fantastic. But I think I've spoken to people involved in and around the league who know it's going to be a challenge. So I think in the first instance, to accept it's a challenge is great, but then to be able to learn and to be able to answer the questions that inevitably crop up, like whether it's on the court and the super shot rule or other rules that might come in, whether it's smaller squads, are they too small, are they too big? I think everyone needs to be realistic enough to know that there's an element of learning that comes. So let's all stay calm. Netball Twitter, or X, should I say, is not a calm place most of the time. But I feel like learning as we go is going to be a really big part of that. And that's, I suppose, in many ways, that's for you and I as well, because we want to champion the sport. But we also, given our backgrounds, we feel like we're in a position to sort of say, well, hang on, why? How? When? Like, I feel like those are very, very fair questions. And I think you raise a great point. I think I've said on several occasions that I sometimes feel netball has missed its opportunities, whether that was kind of a long way back when Pulse and Stars and Sirens first came into the league. It felt to me like it was just a little bit fudged at that time. And then we lost a couple of teams, and then we won the Commonwealth Games, which was fantastic. And then we had a home World Cup. So it feels like every time we've had like a moment, that moment has kind of come and gone a little bit. Not that I'm saying this needs to be the moment right now, but it does need to be the start of a proper moment. And that obviously has a 10-year plan that's been identified by England Netball as we move forward. So
the start of a proper moment.
The start of a proper moment. Maybe there you go. Maybe that's the way we go about it. But you know, I think we've both said enough to say that we feel like the sport is such a great sport. You know, we don't even need to get into the numbers. Everybody knows that at grassroots level and beyond, it's a phenomenal number of young girls and increasingly young boys playing the sport. So it's just, I think the biggest journey is going to be translating those numbers to people who want to watch it and want to engage with it. Yeah. And there isn't an immediate answer. I think we can say that, right? There isn't an immediate answer to that.
No, not at all. I mean, if it were, I would imagine someone would have already come up with it if it were easy, or I'd like to think so. I think netball, one of the things that it has a bit of a marketing problem. It has so many things that are unique, but there seems to be a bit of a lack of a bridge between the elite and the grassroots game, and finding a way to connect the two, I think, is the big ticket answer. But I don't think anyone yet has quite cracked that. And I guess the you know, from a practical point of view, the number of times I've seen fans saying, "You're putting the games on when I'm playing." It's like you've got this such a big participation in your sport, you can't actually find people the time to watch it, which is a great thing and also a painful thing too. So
that is a real challenge. Maybe that's the first question we sit here and ask ourselves, like in terms of looking ahead to this season, where do we think that the times has come down on it? Look, the sort of start times and first centre passes, and you know, I know there's some Sunday night games at sort of 6:00. We'll be interested to see how that goes. Friday evening, I know, has been experimented with for quite a long time. From a playing point of view, it probably feels like that's the best window to it, on a Friday evening and on a Sunday evening. But those two time frames, if you like, bring with it challenges, which obviously, as we've just spent nearly 5 minutes talking about, maybe more.
Well, I think the thing that perhaps people don't appreciate, or should definitely be said, is that Saturday for an arena is a busy time.
Yeah.
And
an expensive time.
And an expensive time. If you're the AO in Manchester, you have people like Gary Barlow coming to sing there. So, you know, where's Thunder going to fit its games around there? I mean, that's a really important question. The same goes for, I mean, the Motor Point is going to be the arena of several teams. It's going to be Nottingham's home, but it's also going to be the arena for Loughborough. So is that an oversaturation for the audience in Nottingham of netball? I mean, I think that's a question we also will probably end up asking ourselves once we start seeing people turning up to those kind of games. I think Birmingham Panthers is going to be a really interesting one because it's a startup. So who is awake to that? The Midlands is very busy with netball teams, so it's a great franchise in terms of the player power is enormous. I mean, I don't think many people can wait to see Gabby Sinclair putting up a few super shots, but it's going to be that Birmingham team finding its audience, finding its feet, finding its home. And has it got time to do that? Like, how soon does it need to show that it can afford to be a part of this league? So, and then never mind the fact that we've also got Mavericks trying to break into Brighton, which I think will be another really cool point in this season as well. But we have no netball in Scotland. We have no netball in the south, really. I mean, that's the south.
That's fair.
Definitely the southwest. So, I think the arena question is going to be huge. It's going to be a really important one because that's such a big part of what the powers that be have signaled for this professionalisation process is making it look the part, but how does it grow from there? That's another thing I'm really curious to see. We're at 50%, but will they be expected to go up already by next season? I don't know. So that's one thing that is going to be part of the new NSL 2.0, but there are lots of others, Paul.
There are lots of things that sometimes I don't know where to start. When I think that's often the case with netball, isn't it? I think probably the other major point, if we consider getting people into arenas and making people watch the sport, is kind of first and foremost in kind of this journey, because you need people to go, you need people to watch for a sport to grow. I think Women's Super League is a perfect example of that. It's not that long ago I was taking my wife and daughter down the road to watch Tottenham ladies play in front of maybe a couple of hundred people, and now they're playing Manchester City at the Tottenham Hotspur Stadium. It's like, well, they've done it. And I get it's football. I get it's football, which is obviously a sort of national sport. But women's football was ridiculed for a really, really long time.
Held back, wasn't it? Really?
Yeah, and it was held back. It was nothing was right about that. But with, in my opinion, strong media who stood to the courage of their convictions and continue to show it, continue to write about it. Some brilliant journalists who would go out and cover the sport and tell its stories. And I'm a journalist. I'm passionate that sport telling stories is a way to grow it. I feel like that has helped the Women's Super League. The Women's Six Nations is another great example. The 100, I think you can take that in two different directions. I think from a traditionalist point of view, many people are pretty critical of it, and maybe rightly so. But there is a whole generation now who quite enjoy it. And in particular, the women's game. Like the women's 100 has been an unequivocal success, both in terms of people going to watch it and the standard of player who's been brought in. And maybe that's another part of the question. We've got reduced squads now, but before we kind of go into sort of maybe looking at the teams, I think the other major point is probably the Super Shot. I know you feel very passionately about this.
Look, the Super Shot. It's like I've prepared this speech. Maybe I have, but look, I think
I'll give you the floor.
Look, there is the Super Shot in and of itself, as a piece of netball, what it does to the game and what it looks like. To me, that's actually not really the point. I think the whole 5 minutes at the end of every quarter is interesting and maybe quite confusing for people that are new to the game, why that's the case. But look, I think there's we have 4 years of evidence now of Super Netball with the Super Shot. So we've seen the way it can be super exciting, the way it closes in games that are, I would argue there is a lot of netball that doesn't need that. I mean, like some of the best netball games are not Super Shot games. I don't think people remember Super Shot games like they remember the 2022 Birmingham Commonwealth Games final. Anyway, Super Shot. I think obviously the way it was introduced is something we're really going to have to, will be interesting to hear what some of our guests say about that. Yeah. The fact that it came out sort of after recruitment, as confirmed by Karen Gregg on Twitter or X. But for me, I think the big thing with this league was that there were other things I felt the league could have looked at first before introducing a new rule. I think we're trying to discern whether smaller squads and smaller team numbers is going to make a difference to our competitive league or not. So we're adding in another variable, which is going to make it hard to judge by the end. Science has changed one thing at a time, not three, amongst other things. There are other things going on. But then, to me, there were other low-hanging fruit that I think this league really could have lent into before it went into something like the Super Shot. I would have loved to have seen the stats data, which is what I mentioned this at the time of the announcement. I would have loved to see stats be way more integrated, to be better collected, and then be more integrated into the coverage of the game on a broadcast level, certainly, and generally in our discussion of it. Fans crave that data. We see that it is available in Super Netball. We see that it's available in some internationals. But in our league, it makes such a difference when we're trying to explain why a player is so good. And we have some, but it's just sort of patchy. And again, I know anecdotally that it's not the same as what the teams collect often. They often have a very different set of data to what's on the Super League website. So I think that needs to change. And maybe there could have been tech we could have leveraged. And that could have been the innovation for the league that year to help improve the way we do stats. And then on a tech front, could we not be looking at empowering our umpires as just another thing that we could have gone for instead of like a Super Shot to help distinguish our league and tell the world that we're serious about professionalizing it? So one thing I think would be brilliant is like a Hawkeye, right? Like, we have that tech in so many sports. Like, why does a ball going out of court have to be a 50-50 decision? I don't think it would slow the game up that much to just quickly check that kind of thing. I'd love to talk to Gilbert about smart ball technology, because we've seen that they can do it in rugby. Can we do it in netball? Can we see what that looks like? Can we have more data? Like, I just think, for me, there were lots of other little things that the league could have done that would have been exciting and been something that I think external forces would have been really interested in. That wasn't a cut and paste from Super Netball. And one final thing on this, which I think is quite curious, is we want to keep the talent that we have in this league. That's certainly mission statements from people like Sam Bird. She's often talked about, I would like our players to stay in our league and keep them here and show our audience here that they want to stay here. If you're handing Super Netball video footage of our players shooting Super Shot, is that not making it a bit easier for some of the scouts over there to decide whether players should come across? I just put that out there as a suggestion. I don't know if it's that cut and paste. Obviously, there's international netball that also, does a lot of that deciding for scouts. But it's just an interesting decision, I think, if I'm going to call it something. Yeah. What about you? Where do you sit on it?
I don't know. I wouldn't say I very much sit on the fence with this. I completely agree with almost everything you've said there. I feel like, as a former statistician, give me numbers every day of the week. Like, one of my favourite sports to write about is tennis, because there are just numbers everywhere. And as someone who has to and has had to and does still write netball match reports, the accessibility of data is something that I think is pretty important, right? You need to be able to hold people to account. You need to know who's turning the ball over, who's missing their shots. Like we've said, we don't just want to be kind of positive. If someone's missed 5 of their first 6 shots, then there's a question there, right? Like if a shooter misses 5 of their first 6, but then if it's a super shot, then it becomes a slightly different question, because if you're forcing someone to shoot from a position that perhaps in traditional netball terms is not where you would want them to shoot from, then all of a sudden it becomes a slightly different thing. There's more jeopardy involved. Then all of a sudden the play beyond that becomes different, because it's like, actually, where do you position your rebounders and all those kind of things. So tactically, I think it will present something that's a little bit different. I tend to agree with you that from a timing point of view, I'm not quite sure that will work. I kind of think, and I often bow to my great friend and the darts commentator Rod Studd in situations like this, that for something to be kind of fair, it needs to be in the whole time. So I kind of almost think, if you're going to have a super shot, why not have it for the whole game? Like, really, and if by extension you then get higher score lines, bigger blowouts, but also closer games, and the two things kind of go a little bit hand in hand, I think that's a byproduct for it. So I would say I'm very much on the fence. I have to say I don't feel quite as passionately as you, and that's fine. We're all right. We're a team here, but we're obviously allowed to debate and argue. I think it's interesting. The squad size thing for me is very, very interesting. I have spoken to a couple of players on a couple of teams, and what quite impressed me was how they felt that having a smaller squad was a bit more beneficial to them, because they then knew that as a team of 10, they were all going to have a part to play. And it wasn't necessarily just a case of being a starter. It would be like, actually, if you've only got 3 players on the bench as opposed to 5, it's like, well, everyone is going to play their part, and maybe the super shot plays a part in that. You've got a person who you bring on as a specialist for a couple of minutes. I feel like that's quite interesting. I think for a league to be sustainable, the smaller squad thing was needed. I also probably think there's fewer franchises was needed. We can argue very, very long as to about where the franchises are, and I feel quite strongly that maybe that could have been very different. But I feel like squad size is a good thing, because I feel like I've spoken to players who feel like they're a closer knit bunch as a team, and that is of no detriment to squad sizes from last year. I think they just all recognise where they stand, maybe as a team of sort of 10. Super shot, as I say, kind of a little bit on the fence about data. Very much on side with you. I feel like the more data, the more information you can have about anything, the better. It helps paint a picture. And I think one thing I'm looking forward to seeing as part of 2.0 is quite how the broadcasts look as well. We obviously are going to have every single game live, which is fantastic. I think how those games look is going to be really, really important. And I think in any sport, technology, how much information is available on the screen is really quite important. So I'll be interested to see how that looks. Obviously in Australia, various elements of the sort of graphics packages look great and lend themselves to the story of the game. And I think sometimes we can maybe get a little bit caught up in kind of the human interest side or like the big picture stuff. But actually, fundamentally, quite often it comes down to, blimey, that was a damn good game of netball I watched today. And I think being able to paint that picture is going to be crucial. And I think numbers do that in a great way, for good and for bad, right? Like I feel like you're able to tell both sides of the story in that regard.
We're going to need a pre-Super Shot era now and a post-Super Shot era for our stats, because that's going to change the game.
This plays with me like pre-Premier League, post-Premier League. I used to get tied up in knots on that front when I worked at Sky as a statistician. It's like, there's obviously very different netball to be played this year, which I think is exciting as well. Like I don't want to just sit here and be overly critical of it, because I think there is a lot of exciting netball to play, and we can continue to talk about all sorts of talking points, but actually that might be a nice little segue to what we can expect maybe from the teams this year. We'll do our in-depth season preview in due course, but kind of Super Cup is up next. I don't know if you've managed to speak to anyone yet. I've had a couple of conversations and what they're expecting. So what are your expectations from Super Cup?
I am curious.
You've been curious twice now, Claire.
Yeah, no, well, I like to sit back and wait and see. Having just gone on a Super Shot rant, maybe that's not the truth. No, I think it's going to be kind of like a county tournament day, in a sense of like a lot of netball all in one day, not very long games. The Super Shot period is like 2.5 minutes. So, that's going to be really interesting to see how teams react to that. I've caught some of the preseason matches in the lead up to this Super Cup, and I think there's a lot of excited energy. Teams still trying to figure each other out, figure out their teammates and how that kind of connects together, because not everyone has had all the time in the world with their team.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Yeah,
and I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to look a little bit into when we do our in-depth coverage. But, you know, there's a lot of internationals in our league, which is great. Obviously, I think that is only positive for the Super League to have that caliber of player, but it has meant restricted playing time, especially for certain teams over others. So the other thing is it's 1 week out from the season proper. We have, like I said, a lot of stop and start netball. And no prize money, which I think is going to really perhaps change the motivation of some of the teams and how they approach it. It'd be a cool thing to win, obviously, inaugural Super Cup on International Women's Day, which is a nice little touch. In Sheffield, we haven't been to Sheffield with Super League for a season opener, so that would be really exciting to venture up there and see what that looks like. I'll be on the ground, so be catching some reaction to that and seeing how people feel about the games. I will not try and call this who will win it, because I just actually think it's damn impossible. We'll have some fun with the predictions when we get there next week, and we've got some cool ideas. We'd love you to get involved as well. We have the socials, I believe they call them these days. Chloe's in charge of that. No, we have a social media manager. What do you mean?
We also have an email address as well, which Chloe is
netballunlocked@gmail.com.
So please drop us a message, let us know what you think, ask us some questions. We kind of want to represent you as well, I think, as we draw this first kind of attempt at a podcast to a close. I think we're very keen to kind of represent the fans as well, and kind of try and inform as much as anything. So being able to ask the questions you want, hopefully maybe answer one or two. There are obviously lots of questions as we go into this season. I certainly don't think we're going to attempt to predict the Super Cup this weekend. I do think for a lot of teams it's going to be like almost, okay, let's see what we've got here. I genuinely think that. I think a lot of teams, because of the international calendars and because of the way players have been spread far and wide, and for some teams who've been so unfortunate with injuries, like there's still that getting to know you process that they maybe started a couple of weeks ago, and we shouldn't lose sight of that. I think in that regard, it's going to be great to see the teams out and to sort of get a sense of kind of what players are feeling ahead of this new era.
And you know what, Paul? I'm going to say this because it's back to my super shot rant a little bit, but I think a lot of people...
But this is not going to be something you're going to go through every single week.
It's not going to be like, give Chloe 5 minutes to rant about super shot. No. But I think one of the things that's going to become really evident to people, and it'd be really interesting to see generally, especially in person, if you're able to get out to an arena and put your bum on a seat, is see the markings of the super shot, because I'll be honest with you, it's not that far out. So I expect we're going to see a lot, that middle center point on the inner circle is going to be a hot spot. But I think that will be something that will strike people. It certainly struck me when I first saw it. I went to see Mavericks they were hosting a preseason game, and I just remember thinking, oh my gosh, actually I don't know if it's because of fast fives, you have this impression that it's going to be, and the word super denotes something that is quite fun. Yeah. But actually, I think people will be pleasantly surprised at sort of the way that actually looks. So look out for that, definitely, amongst the other things. All these new players that we're going to have, that we're going to see for the first time. New teams, Nottingham Forest, Birmingham Panthers.
Everyone loves a new kit. Everyone loves a new kit.
So it's going to be very exciting. I'm stoked to see it. It's been a while, with the Super League, so curious to see curious to see what it
the curious episode. Maybe we call it the curious episode.
Chloe, that's me. Always.
Coaches as well, right? We've got a couple of new coaches. We've got some new faces to see sort of on the side.
First time coaches.
Yeah, we'll see sort of Chelsea, Forest, which I think is a really interesting concept as a club, and we'll maybe talk to them more, and Chelsea as the season goes on. We've got Lauren Palmer at Rhinos, who seem to kind of be going through this bit of a kind of revolving car wash of coaches and players and setup. So it'd be really interesting to see where they shake out. And then obviously at the Dragons as well, you've got Regina Bloxham. So there's kind of a lot to see on that front as well, because alongside sort of let's say sort of last year, Joe Tripp was one of the sort of real standout emerging coaches. We know what we've got in people like Sam Bird, Karen Gregg, and Vic Burgess, who've been around the league for a long time, Camilla Buchanan as well. So it's a nice mix, I think, on the coaching front this year. And I sometimes kind of think we often talk about the players maybe more than the coaches. And I think as maybe the season goes on, we'll maybe devote 1 or 2 episodes to kind of coaching in the league and kind of how that's evolving and how that's changing. Not to mention sort of players, because it's a challenge for all of these people, right? Like they've got different things to kind of balance, and for some it's purely coaching, for some it's maybe a bit more of a director of netball role where they take on a lot behind the scenes, and in Sam Bird's case it's as the CEO of the entire operation. So there's a lot for these women to juggle. So I'm really curious, Chloe, to see how that shakes out. But I think just as one final point, we've mentioned about wanting to get people involved. Kind of what's your message to any fans we might have kicking things off? What's your message?
I mean, we are both fans of the game as well. So there are lots of things that we would wish we knew, we'd like to know. So please, no question is, if you think we can try and answer it, we will try and answer it. Let us know.
And we'll tell you if we can't, right?
Yeah, as well. And I think that's important too, to let you know what we can't know, or we've tried to know and we haven't been able to find out, because this is, it's about, I think the word you used at the start was pulling the curtain back a little bit. And we want to be able to do that in a way that's authentic and also helpful, because so much of netball is amazing, but people don't quite understand it or know it, and we feel frustrated, I think, is the initial reaction, when maybe there was actually a good reason or whatever. So we want to try and definitely the little things, bring those to attention. So please do, if you want to know something, let us know and we'll do our best. And enjoy it. Hopefully we bring a good amount of informative, a good amount of interesting, and we'll be in your feeds probably more than you would like.
See how that goes.
Yeah. Paul and I are doing this on top of jobs that we both hold and keep us very busy. So the US, man, it never stops. And I've got a Winter Olympics coming next year. So, and we're in the middle of qualification. And I'll be covering some curling, which is a bit of a difference.
I think that's important, though, right? I think in a funny way, we're sort of reflective of the netball audience and the players that have played it for so long. It's like you're juggling so many things, and we would all love to sit here and say that netball is my sole focus, writing about it, playing about it, coaching about it, whatever it might be for you. But the reality, and this is maybe a nice way to sort of draw a conclusion, is that at the moment there's a lot of people being pulled in a number of directions to try and get this sport where it wants to be. And I think in that regard, I think I would ask for patience, and you kind of said it a little bit at the start of the season, at the start of the episode. I feel like there's going to be a lot to learn as we go, and I feel like doing that on a daily basis and being able to talk it out, Chloe, on the Super Shop front at the very least.
Persuade me.
This is a safe space. This is a safe space for you to talk about it. But look, as Chloe says, we'd love to be able to hear from you. We're kind of on a bit of a journey here ourselves. We're going to speak to people from around the league, and you can kind of get involved, as Chloe and I have both said. So find us on all the usual socials. So far, YouTube, Insta, X. That's
TikTok, TBC, YouTube, yeah. TikTok is TBC. I'm gonna get on there. Don't worry, everyone.
TikTok is TBC. Yeah, my daughter would say, "Hey, you on TikTok yet?" No, not yet. No.
Not yet.
Not yet. But look, as well, there's plenty of ways to get in touch, but kind of help us and we'll help you. So like us, subscribe us, do all those kind of things that will help us grow and give us a little bit more authority, because as I said in our mission statement, Chloe, we've got big ideas, we've got big thoughts, and I think ultimately we've got some big plans, and we're going to ride this train out, right?
Absolutely. We're in it for the long haul, Paul.
Good. So you enjoy Sheffield.
Thank you, I will.
And the curling, clearly.
Eventually, yes, when I get there.
And we'll be back next week to reflect on Super Cup. Hopefully hear from one or two people and players and coaches up there, and be back with a meaty preview of the season, because I feel like 8 teams, there's going to be a lot to get stuck into.
Buckle up, everyone.
Buckle up. That's the way. That's our sign.
Yeah.
That's our sign. Buckle up.